Today, we'll be diving into Layers of Fear, a psychological horror game where you play as an alcoholic, possibly schizophrenic artist, visiting his home once more to finish his masterpiece. It was developed by Bloober Team, the same studio currently working on the Silent Hill 2 remake. This video will focus on the original 2016 version of the game, not the recent remake. While, keep in mind, I'm not completely familiar with the remake, it seems to have traded the subtlety and simplicity of the original for a more technically impressive and technically polished experience. In that sense, yeah, it's probably the better game. But in the process, I think it loses some of the charm and the speculative, more open-ended nature that made the original so intriguing. I personally viewed the 2016 version as just a solid, standalone experience. And I think experience is definitely the right word here. Layers of Fear 2016 doesn't really have many gameplay elements. It's kind of a walking simulator, but it's more focused in immersing you in a haunting narrative of heartbreaking personal tragedy and extreme psychological degradation. And I think it absolutely succeeds in delivering a deeply unsettling and emotional story. Just a little note before we start, none of the characters have names, so when referring to the protagonist, I might call him father, painter, or husband. The wife, I might call her wife, mother, or musician. And the daughter, just daughter. Let's begin.
I know how you must feel. Lost. Alone. Hopeless. You probably deserve it. But even for you, there is still a way. A way to bring it all back. The one precious thing you ever truly desired. Finish it.
Every portrait that is painted with feeling is a portrait of the artist, not of the sitter. This is a quote from Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray, which was undoubtedly a big influence on this game. You can even find a copy of the book in the protagonist's study. We're going to look back on this quote much later. We start in the entrance hall of this Victorian mansion. Right away, we see two paintings which will foreshadow the upcoming story. On one side, we see Past and Present by August Egg, part of a three-part series showing the deterioration of an upper-middle-class Victorian family, its catalyst being an affair committed by the wife. Don't take that at face value, however, as I believe the game will flip this in an interesting and insidious way. On the other side, The Abduction of Ganymede by Rembrandt. It depicts the mythological story of Ganymede, a young boy from Greek mythology, abducted by Zeus in the form of an eagle, so he could be his cupbearer. However, Rembrandt's painting takes a much more realistic approach to this story. Instead of portraying Ganymede as a graceful youth, the boy is depicted as a frightened, chubby child, crying and wetting himself as the eagle carries him away. In a way, removing the mythological, romantic elements of the story and making it more grounded and human, and also, I think, more tragic. The significance of this painting, of a young child being taken away, will be very obvious much later. Entering the house, we see a newspaper clipping showing that the painter was, at least at some point, highly acclaimed, even being compared to the likes of Jan van Eyck and Leonardo da Vinci. A note on the table shows that the painter has called pest control multiple times to solve some rat problem. But they claim there are no rats and ask the painter to stop harassing them, or else they'll take legal action. These rats have become somewhat of an obsession for the painter, as we can see from this closet. He seems to be quite an obsessive person in general. In a note, which I assume is written by him, about his daughter, he tells his wife, "I'm sorry for yesterday. You were right. I overreacted. It's just that this isn't about me. It's about her. Everything I do with her best interest in mind." I guess I've always believed that in an imperfect world, it's worth it to strive for perfection. Speaking of imperfection, in the bathroom, we find an order for a below-the-knee prosthesis, which was mistakenly made in the wrong length. This explains our noticeable wobble and sometimes limping, which I deactivated in the settings because it was making me sick. I believe he most likely lost his leg in a war, which would explain these medals we see sometimes throughout the game. Some people believe he was in the First World War, but I find this a bit of a stretch, as the game, during sections set in the present, is set somewhere in the 1910s, but it is possible that he got an honorable discharge. In the bathroom, we also find some bloody bandages, although these most likely don't belong to him. In the messy kitchen, we find a note from his wife which says, "Figured you'd be up all night, so I made you a little treat. You know, I bet even Rembrandt occasionally took time off from being brilliant. and snort his head off like the rest of us common folk. I know, gasp. In other words, get some sleep, you big dummy. Stupid. Love you. This letter not only shows how dedicated he is to his craft, it's also an artifact of happier times. Going into the basement, we find what I believe to be the daughter's more recent report card, showing that she already shows a propensity for the arts, but is failing at everything else. Upstairs, in the master bedroom, we find a newspaper clipping raving about the wife's recent musical performances as a great multi-instrumentalist, which managed to win over even the harshest of critics. On her vanity table, we find another clipping of a large fire at a department store, which injured many and even killed some. And then we have their closets. Now, I want to talk about these two paintings, one next to the wife's piano and the other next to the husband's study, as I believe they're kind of used to represent the two characters. I find it interesting because there are paintings of the wife and husband, but they are not used here. Let's start with the husband. This is a self-portrait of Anthony Shugins. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce that, but I think the significance here might be that, similarly to the protagonist, he was a talented but quite eccentric and somewhat difficult person. His own biographer said, referring to him, the unsympathetic character of the painter. But more interesting than that is that they chose a much more obscure Dutch artist to represent him, as opposed to perhaps choosing somebody like Rembrandt, or somebody like Van Eyck, who I believe is an artist that the protagonist very much looks up to. Now the wife, or the musician. This is a painting titled The Repentant Saint Mary Magdalene by Domenico Fetti. It depicts Mary Magdalene, who is said to have been one of Jesus' followers and witnessed both his crucifixion and resurrection. Maybe more significantly, in art, she is often viewed as a symbol of suffering and redemption, and this symbolism is crucial to understanding the wife's character and her relationship with the protagonist. Judging the painting itself, there's a theme of memento mori, remember death, as she's lost in thought staring at the skull. As you will see, the wife's character has constant reminders of death, decay, and the overall futility of life. In the study, we get the key to the painter's workshop and go in. The workshop is predictably a mess, and the chests are filled with booze. If you haven't noticed that he's an alcoholic, then maybe you're an alcoholic? Next to a covered canvas, we see an unfinished note. This note will fill certain parts and erase others throughout the game depending on the actions you take while playing. But this video will exclusively go over what I believe to be the true ending of this game, so don't expect me to go over all of the different possibilities. Unveiling the main canvas, we see what looks like the beginnings of a landscape painting of a regular overcast day, with two haphazardly placed red splatters. This is the beginning of the magnum opus, the painting our protagonist must finish.
The one precious thing you ever truly desired. Finish it.
Above the door we see, "Get it right this time," implying that he has tried to make this piece many, many times. When we leave the workshop, the house has now changed, and this is where we start this fever dream-like adventure through the memories of the painter. We walk down a hallway and find Francisco Goya's Witch's Sabbath hanging above a couch. Throughout the game, we'll encounter many of Goya's works. While I don't think most of these paintings tie directly into the story, their presence, I think, is still significant. Goya is a very respected Spanish painter of the 19th century, even creating portraits for the Spanish royal family. However, after a mysterious illness, now believed to be lead poisoning, left him deaf, Goya's world changed dramatically. He largely withdrew from society and lived in his estate, simply known as Quinta del Sordo, the villa of the deaf one. During his time in this secluded estate, many believed Goya began to unravel mentally. It was here that he created the infamous Black Paintings, a series of dark, disturbing works that covered the walls of his home. These paintings were filled with grim, nightmarish imagery and reflected Goya's deepening disillusionment with Spanish society, humanity, and perhaps even himself. His criticism of the world's madness and his own descent into it, I think, mirror the psychological degradation we witness in the game's protagonist. In a cupboard, we find a note from the couple's neighbor, complaining about their loud, late-night arguments. It seems almost inevitable that a couple comprised of two artists, no doubt with intense personalities, would eventually clash with one another. Going into this next room, we find the invitation to their wedding, and in a locked box, an expensive ring.
The thought alone that the most beautiful piece of art doesn't have my name on it is killing me. So, will you marry me?
This door magically appears behind you, and you move on. The game does this trick a lot, and it works very well. I found that it makes you constantly afraid of turning around, for fear of what will show up behind you. In some cases, it'll jump scare you, or in others, it'll just completely change your environment, leaving you a little bit dazed and confused. Going into this study, you examine this baby doll. And fall into a basement filled with paintings, one of which you can tell in the darkness is a massive portrait of Jan van Eyck. We see this portrait a lot in this game, and assuming we are traversing through the painter's memories and psyche, Van Eyck seems to mark a strong presence. I believe he symbolizes artistic mastery and the weight of legacy, both a source of inspiration and a haunting reminder of the painter's own artistic insecurities. At one point, a newspaper clipping compares the painter to Van Eyck, amplifying the pressure to live up to such an iconic figure. Van Eyck seems to loom over the painter as the standard of greatness that he both idolizes and fears he will never achieve. It's as if he feels judged by him, with Van Eyck's stare reflecting the crushing pressure to finish the magnum opus, or be forgotten. When you go back up, the baby doll, which is often used to represent the painter's daughter, is impaled by the antlers of the deer, while Van Eyck takes the place of the doll at the start, which I think would symbolize the painter prioritizing his art over his family. We then come to a hallway full of these layered portraits, like there are two faces in one painting. I think this could symbolize a sort of jumbled and fragmented idea of the painter's own identity, how he struggles to reconcile different parts of himself due to his conflicting emotions about his past and present actions.
Now, a tiny bit to the left. Yes, just like that. Hold that pose. I want to get all those lovely curves just right.
You'll see more examples of this later, but it seems that the painter's wife, the musician, inspires him to paint, to create. In the back, she also added that she's not that round. In this other room, we find a note from the painter's agent, which reads, "Hey, in regards to your previous letter, I'm sure it's nothing to be concerned about. Women tend to get weird after having a baby, hormone imbalances and the like. When we had our first, I remember Valerie got the blues real bad. I would ask her what she wanted for lunch and she'd just burst into tears." You know, I've actually heard of this phenomena of postpartum depression, but this stuff like this actually happen? Like, do you just walk into the kitchen and you're like, "Hey, you want some chicken or something?" Anyway, he says he's getting a lot of commissions right now, but he understands if he wants to take some time off to be with his family. But I think you'll know which is more important to him. Into this hallway, we hear the wife crying in this locked room. On the windowsill is a hairbrush.
Hello. It's about time for us to talk, don't you think? I mean, I've seen you in my house so many times, and yet I could never find the courage to face you directly. Not until now.
It doesn't sound like she's talking to her husband, so who's she talking to? We then reach the kitchen, and we get one of the more iconic scenes of this game. Fruit begins to fall out of this still life painting and slowly rots. This painting is Natureza Morta by Spanish painter Antonio de Pedera y Salgado. Natureza Morta means dead nature, and Salgado was quite known for his use of the memento mori theme, with many works depicting death, decay, and vanity, all themes present in layers of fear.
first, I looked for a canvas. Not just any canvas. I had to find a knife. Not one of those bread ones. It needed to be as sharp as a razor. So I used a razor, in fact, and then carefully flayed the skin. Booze helped keep my hand steady.
The door then leads us back to the workshop, where we apply this patch of skin to the canvas, creating the next phase of the magnum opus. This second iteration emerges as two red, decaying flamingos. It's only fitting that the painter, in his madness, would take such a graceful, elegant creature, known for its natural beauty and poise, and turn it into something so rotten and disgusting. Certainly a reflection of his psyche, of his obsession with perfection, which, as you'll see, only serves to corrupt. Whose skin this is, we still don't know, but here's something maybe you can help me out with. Is the game implying here that the canvas is now entirely made up of skin? Or is it just he used the skin to sort of prime the canvas? I never really got that. Very disturbing either way, but anyway. You exit the workshop into an elevator. You then see a scribble saying, "Past catches on." This, I believe, refers to the mental anguish the painter is in over his past actions, showing that he's at least subconsciously aware of what he's done and does feel guilty about it. In this low-lit room, we find a letter that gives us some very important information. It reads, "Dear Sir, while I certainly understand that you are upset, and I have nothing but sympathy for your wife and yourself, I must categorically state that I do not wish to receive any further correspondence from you in this matter. Any skin graft procedure is extremely complicated and inherently associated with the risk of failure. Having stated that, I assure you that me and my colleagues at St. Anne have made every effort to ensure a positive outcome for your wife. Personally speaking, I believe we have done the best job possible considering the extent of the tissue damage. You are, of course, entitled to your opinion, and I can certainly understand your disappointment. What I do not understand is how you seem to think writing hateful letters to me or my fellow doctors will ameliorate the situation. As I've already stated, I can certainly understand you've been under a lot of stress as of late, and thus I will not press charges if you refrain from any further correspondence. Let me make it absolutely clear that I will not tolerate any further threats aimed at my staff, my family, or myself. If you wish to seek psychological help, I can have my assistant provide contact information of several specialists who would be more than competent to help you get through these hard times. With regards and best wishes for you and your wife, William H. Green, MD." From this letter, we can safely assume that the wife had been in that department store fire and was severely hurt, as suggested by the mention of skin grafts and extensive tissue damage. However, what stands out is how little the letter is focused on the medical procedures themselves. Instead, the majority of the letter is spent addressing the increasingly alarming and erratic behavior of the painter. It's clear that the painter has been harassing the medical staff, sending hateful letters, and even issuing threats, which have escalated to the point where the doctors feel they need to warn him like that. What I find interesting is that it's quite similar to the letter from the pest control company. Remember, the painter was and is sure the house is full of rats, when the exterminators couldn't find any. Are the rats we see through the game even real? None of the traps have even caught any. Like, not a single one. When you leave, the layout of the hallway has changed, and you hear a soft piano. It's coming from this painting. Now, I'm not totally sure what painting this is, or if this is even a real historical piece. I believe this might be an edited version of the painting by American Impressionist William Merritt Chase, of his wife playing the piano, except they've changed her hair to black to match with the wife's hair, and the upright piano changed to the wife's grand piano we saw upstairs.
Why did you stop? That tune was perfect. Honey, please, just a little longer. At least until I finish painting this one part. Oh, don't make me beg.
So, along with her appearance, her talents on the piano also seem to inspire the painter and his art. Moving on though, behind this door you hear some fire crackling. But this door is locked. From upstairs we see the fire, and in the burning room, on display, is Saint Mary Magdalene, the painting meant to symbolically represent the musician. We eventually reach this hallway, where we find the painting The Flaying of Marsyas by Tiziano Veselio. This piece depicts the mythological Greek story of Marsyas, who in his immense arrogance, pride, and blindness challenges Apollo, the Greek god of music and arts, to a musical contest. Apollo plays his lyre upside down, making him the natural victor. You might think that Apollo was like, okay, well, I'm clearly the better music guy, but dude, just keep practicing, you'll get better. But in reality, he was more like, chat, rip his skin off. We get a brutal depiction of this, but instead of it being gory, it's more so tragic. Marsyas is strung up, his body contorted in agony, while Apollo, calm and composed, administers the punishment with an almost divine indifference. You might think that this is about the protagonist's wife. After all, she's an accomplished musician who didn't get flayed, but did get horrendously burnt. On the surface level, yes, and that might very well be intentional. But on a symbolic level, I think it matches the painter much better. And we are in the painter's psyche, so I believe most of what we see will probably symbolically relate to him more. Later in the game, we see that the painter is not so different from Marsyas. Much like the unfortunate satyr, he's a satyr by the way, like Danny DeVito in Hercules.
What's the matter? You never seen a satyr before? No.
Believes that through his art, he can transcend human boundaries. But just as Marsyas suffers for his arrogance, the painter faces a figurative flaying, the unraveling of his insanity and of his soul. As he delves deeper into his obsession, we witness the gradual peeling away of his mind, layer by layer, until only madness or painful self-awareness remains. In this cupboard, we find a note with warning signs of schizophrenia, which the painter thought or still thinks his wife might have. Blank expression, stares off into space. Yes. Involuntary facial movements. Yes. Insomnia. Haven't noticed. He hasn't noticed probably because he never sleeps with her. Even before the accident, we see that note of his wife telling him to go to bed and stop painting. Unusual gestures and postures. Always had that. Unable to experience joy from activities. Definitely. Depersonalization. What does that even mean? Awkward, clumsy movement. Might be from the accident. So the fire must have even damaged her nervous system. Because we also see that she has involuntary facial movement. Lack of motivation. Yes. Suicidal tendencies. Huh? It seems the painter believes that the wife is mentally ill in some way. However, as far as psychological damage goes, I only see one guy filling his closet with wine bottles. You go into this lounge, and when you leave, you put this code into this lock thingy, I don't know what they're called, and get a key that leads into this room, with a bloody, broken chair. On it is a note from the musician. We know right away it's her, because the handwriting is now super shaky and sloppy, which is how all our notes read after the accident. It reads, "Alright, let's try this again. Finally managed to play a little, if banging on keys awkwardly counts as playing. I won't lie, it drives me insane not to have full control of my fingers. In any case, I was promptly berated by my loving husband, who said I should be resting. I know he means well, but how will I ever get better if I don't work at it? The worst thing is, I could swear I smelled liquor on his breath. God, please, not this again." So the burns are so bad she has lost the ability to play the piano. She assumes her husband, although perhaps annoying, means well. But I wonder how much of that concern is directed at the well-being of his wife, and how much of it is directed at the idea of his muse, the beautiful, talented musician who inspires his works. But that's an issue for later. The last phrase tells us that she's well aware of his relationship with alcohol. It makes me wonder about the previous scene. Was what we saw perhaps a representation of the painter's erratic and maybe violent behavior during his 3 a.m. drinking challenge? Later on, we see the still life painting of some flowers disintegrating into ash, which I believe might represent the painter's despair over the loss of his wife's beauty. In this next room, we go into this mirror to see the room we were just in decaying, implying that we are seeing the room for what it truly is. On the wall, it says it cannot be undone. This could reflect the painter's painful realization that the harm caused to his wife is irreversible. Unlike his paintings, he can't just paint over it. He can't fix it. We go through this door and see the wife's wheelchair. It's later implied that she can in fact walk, but my guess is that it's extremely difficult for her to do so the wheelchair would have likely lightened that burden. I'm also guessing that the painter did not like this wheelchair, because remember, we are in his perspective, so anything that is meant to scare us is likely something significant to him, something that bothered him deeply. After that, we reach this hallway, where we get a really cool scene. These are the parts I really love in this game. They encapsulate the painter's slipping sanity and grip on reality, while also making you hyper aware of your surroundings, because you can never fully trust whatever space you're in. I think it's also important to point out that this game doesn't have any loading screens. It's all just a fluid experience with these illusions and spaces that nonsensically go into each other. It's all very cool. Moving on though, we find a note written by the painter about his wife's new hobby. It reads, "She's been at it again. Earlier in the day, I found more of her reviews. Little notes stuck on one of my latest paintings. Some of the most scathing, hateful shit I've ever read about my work. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. After all, she knows me well enough to know what really gets to me. I just can't believe she would use that against me. Worst thing is, when I confronted her about it, she claimed she hadn't written any of them. Like I can't tell her handwriting. Jesus, does she really hate me that much? Or is her mind starting to slip? I just don't know what to do anymore." The painter might not be the most reliable narrator, but I'll choose to believe him that this did happen. It seems too specific of an hallucination, and it adds up with the musician's later behavior. But this seems to be where she began to showcase her resentment towards her husband. Going into this hallway and into this candlelit room, the door locks behind you, and you begin to hear something outside. That was definitely the musician, and that unpleasant stomping sound is most likely her trying to use her prosthetic leg, which we learn about later. From the perspective of the painter, as she gets closer, the walls begin to rot or burn, which I think is meant to be this nasty analogy about how the painter viewed her. As a matter of fact, we are hiding from her, implying that the painter tried to avoid her whenever he could, slowly becoming more absorbed in his work. On the nightstand, we find another one of the musician's notes. It reads, "Found his little collection of empty bottles this morning. Little." I reacted badly. I know it's hard for him too, but god damn it, he should know better. With a small child in the house, that's just irresponsible. On the way to the next section, we find an ad for a woman's beauty product, something the musician no doubt thought about after her accident. In the bedroom, now we find a violin.
Honey, what in the world are you doing? What did the doctor say about straining yourself? Leave that thing alone. It's not going anywhere.
Upon closer inspection, you notice everything is slightly deformed. I mean, look at this bed. You would not see me catching some Z's in that. You would not see me with a big snot bubble getting bigger and smaller in accordance with my breathing in that bed. Unless, of course, I had some kind of sleep mask. Well, good thing this video is sponsored by Manta Sleep. You know, my friend Stinquini was telling me, you guys know Stinquini, right? He's like the iconic mascot of the Freddy Dude channel. It's like I'm the brains of the channel and he's like the stomach. Anyway, he was telling me about this slick new sleeping mask that allowed him to instantly improve his sleep quality, made with these incredibly soft, high quality materials. Of course I was worried if it was going to fit my precious little pinhead, but he calmed my worries, mentioning the mask's extensive adjustability, making it perfect whether you're a lanky goblin build or a wise gnome type character. I asked him, where can I get this mask? But unfortunately for me, he had on the Mantis Sound sleep mask, renowned for its cleverly integrated Bluetooth headphones, perfect for listening to ASMR, white noise, and other sleep-inducing videos. By the time I asked, he was already in deep REM sleep. Well, luckily for me, Manta Sleep were nice enough to send me my own mask, plus their Manta Cool eye cups. They're freezable eye cups used to soothe the eyes and the sinuses, so that I too can get that beauty sleep, just like Stinkweenie. Those integrated headphones are honestly a game changer. So if you're interested, go ahead and click the link in the description and use the code FREDDY10 for a 10% discount. That's Freddy all caps 10. Not only will you be investing in your sleep, you'll also be supporting the channel. So thank you Manta Sleep for sponsoring this video. You distort the room using this gramophone and get the next material for our painting.
And a plastic tubing. I siphoned gas before. I knew how it was done. I stuck the tube in a vein and sucked on it until blood filled my mouth. Then put the tube in the jar and it just kept coming. A taste of copper haunted me the entire night. Why didn't I think of a syringe?
We then add it to the magnum opus. And we get what looks like jumbled flesh with a cavernous opening. It could perhaps mean we are delving deeper into the painter's psyche as it's collapsing in on itself. Some people also say it looks like a scorpion to them. I don't see it, but make of that what you will. We reach a hallway with the musician's grand piano, chained up. As you approach it, I assumed the wife's musical ability and overall success in that field was something the painter valued deeply. She was someone he saw as being on equal footing to him artistically. It's only natural that an obsessed perfectionist like the painter, who was so focused on achieving greatness, would project those same expectations onto her. Her music wasn't just an inspiration, it was a standard. After the accident, as far as the painter's concerned, she's gone, and we'll get to see how he sees her now. In this scene, we open a door to see creator's block. He most likely went through a creative drought after his wife's accident. After that, we get another perfect example of how the game screws with you.
Gives me conniptions.
In this hallway, we find another note, which is a continuation to the note about the wife's harsh reviews. More notes today, even worse than before. The sad part is, I agree with every word. Later on, we find another doctor's note. It reads, "Dear Sir, if I am to be honest with you, I can't say your letter was unexpected. Numerous colleagues have informed me that you had previously sought their advice in this matter, and while it is perfectly understandable for a patient to demand a second opinion, I would think 16 concurring opinions would be enough. Still, out of respect for you and your wife, I have examined the case thoroughly, and I have to concur with my colleagues. Involuntary muscle spasms are not uncommon with patients who have suffered burns as severe as your wife did. What you refer to as a freakish grin or an unnerving yelp, though many would find such expressions hurtful, could indeed be manifestations of nerve damage. The other symptoms you mentioned do not seem to be physiological, but rather purely psychological in nature. Traumatic events can lead to severe stress, and that is nothing to be ashamed of. As to your demand that we quote-unquote fix your wife, You have to understand that what she went through cannot be undone with one simple procedure. It is a long, arduous process that will require all your strength and support. Please feel free to contact me or my colleagues should you wish to discuss a long-term rehabilitation program. Sincerely, Robert Richards. Note how the painter wants his wife to be fixed, implying she is broken. This is obviously quite dehumanizing. Perhaps it would be more acceptable if he was talking about one of his paintings. Those can be fixed, retouched, perfected, and made whole again. I wonder how much of this projection of perfection stems from the painter's own amputated leg. Not to mention he is clearly a psychologically scarred man himself. He is, after all, an alcoholic, and most, if not all, addiction stems from within. He is hypersensitive and has a clear aversion to disgust, seen in his possibly completely mentally fabricated rats, which, according to these sketches that you find throughout the game, borrow themselves in the food he eats, his hair, and even his skin. I would not be surprised if the wife's freakish grin was simply her attempt to smile through her disfigurement, an innocent act of affection that is distorted by his extreme sensitivity to disgust. Her smile, rather than being met with love, likely triggered revulsion in him. In his fragile state, that very smile became a symbol of imperfection, something grotesque and deeply terrifying, and so he most likely started to avoid her. Let's move on to the next important note. In any case, as your lawyer, I advise you to refrain from any imprudent actions. In other words, don't do anything stupid. We still have a chance of winning this. Believe it or not, I've gotten clients out of deeper shit than this. Just don't make it any worse. Lay low for a while and let me appeal the court order. This social worker definitely has it in for you. We can use that to our advantage. Portray you as a victim of the system, a husband in mourning, a momentary lapse of reason, an overzealous bureaucrat. Trust me, this is our best option. Considering what you've been through lately, I'd say we have a good 50-50 chance of a good outcome. But not if you keep trying to convince everyone that you've gone completely insane. No more outbursts, no more rambling. Better yet, no public appearances whatsoever. You could still get your daughter. Sorry if this is confusing, but this is a huge jump in time. And this is the order the game shows you these notes. All you need to know right now is that the painter has done something to cause a social worker to want to remove his daughter from his custody. This is why we see the abduction of Ganymede by Rembrandt in the entrance hall. It was just a clever piece of foreshadowing, hiding in plain sight. Anyway, after a bad trip from gas station weed, we reach the basement, where we see the wife's piano. After some horrible notes, we reach some beauty. Although with some jarring hiccups. This is what it was like for her to try to play through her physical pain, grasping at those fleeting moments of grace, only for the scars to pull her back into imperfection.
I needed to remove the flesh from the bone. At first, I was lost as to how, but then I sawed it off with a handsaw, boiled it, then put the bone in a mortar. I had to get one, obviously. This was not something I'd done before. Finally, I mixed the dust with some white paint. It made for a lovely undercoat.
We then find our next painting material. As usual, the previous door now leads to the workshop, where we apply the bone paint. What we get is still incredibly abstract and expressive, but there is some order lying underneath this amalgamation of flesh. It seems a portrait is about to emerge. Now that I look at this phase of the masterpiece, it kind of looks like a Francis Bacon portrait, except much more chaotic and gory. We see the painter's wife walking across the hallway, sobbing. The scribble on the wall says, "Ignore her," most likely what the painter started doing after the accident. After some Chris Angel mind freak moments, we find a drawing made by the painter's daughter.
No, that's not right. Try again. Don't give me that look. What do we do when we fail? We start over. You're better than this. Now sit down, and this time, let's make it perfect.
Next to it, he angrily writes, "Why pink?" It also seems like he made a realistic horse silhouette to show her what she should have drawn, which is a little psychotic.
There is no passion, there is no vision, there is no aggression, there is no fucking mindset.
In this area, we start to get some more focus on the couple's daughter. Even when the actual content isn't about her, her drawings will be plastered all over the place, implying that at this stage of this hallucinatory trip through the painter's mind, the daughter has already been born and is a part of, well, their lives. And the rats seem to be showing up more and more. Now, we talked about how the rats are possibly a visual representation of his extreme sensitivity to disgust and obsession with perfection. So I imagine the birth of his daughter brought in a lot of unpredictable variables and a lot of chaos, like badly drawn horses. But I also think perhaps the daughter might resemble her mother, and so this gives him a constant reminder that his wife is not how he would like her to be, let's say that. I have another theory surrounding this, but we'll get to that later. Our next major story progressing object is some baby shoes.
Sweet Jesus! Did you just buy half of the department store? Honey, you don't even know yet if it's gonna be a boy or a girl.
I wonder if this is the same department store where the fire happened. Next, we get something that scared me way more than it should have. On the other side of the room, we have another note, written by the wife, which we can tell by the shaky handwriting. It reads, "I had to move most of the dolls out of her room. It was getting ridiculous. You can't just throw gifts at her whenever you feel guilty for whatever it is you feel guilty for. She needs a father, not another useless distraction." We will talk about what the painter might feel guilty about surrounding his daughter a little bit later. We then get one of my favorite scenes in this game. I think this sequence was really clever. It lulls you into a false sense of security by playing the familiar whispering sound, something you've come to associate with these story-related objects. So when you first hear it, you're already primed to expect some sort of exposition, a downtime. Then you notice that talking behind our backs scribble on the wall. You turn around and, while it's a bit unsettling, it's nothing too crazy. But the whispering starts again, and the same thing happens, making you think it's just a repeating cycle. But that's when the game tricks you. Just when you think you've got it figured out, you get hit with a jump scare, and it feels more earned, because the game did the work of rising that tension and playing around with your expectations. From a symbolic standpoint, I wonder if this sequence is meant to reflect the painter's growing paranoia and neuroticism. His fear that his wife and daughter are somehow plotting against him or something? I don't know. The wife did mention that he feels guilty about something. It's as if his guilt is wrapping his perception, making him believe that those closest to him are conspiring to give him his rightful comeuppance, when in reality it's likely just a projection of his own unresolved guilt. This would in turn also fit with his overall obsessive personality. Next we have this section that is clearly meant to be about the daughter, hence all the dolls. And of course we have the classic scene. But to be completely honest with you, I don't really know what to make of this. I was thinking it could fit into my previous theory of his daughter being this new, chaotic, unpredictable element in his life that he subconsciously resents. That's a theory, but it doesn't feel quite right. If you've played this game, let me know what you think the game is trying to convey here. Moving on, we find the wife's perfume bottle.
I had the most beautiful dream last night. I dreamt he came to me, embraced me, loved me, as he once did. But we both know that while I dreamed my silly little dream, It was you. It was you he really lusted for.
This easily connects to that hairbrush we found at the beginning of the game, but we're still yet to find out who she's talking to exactly. In this room, we see a doll, drawing. Again, dolls are meant to represent the daughter. The drawing is of some shadowy figure with these angry scribbles. I think this is meant to be the painter. Later on, in her room, we see another drawing, with her, and again, this scribbled shadowy man. There's an obvious depersonalization when she draws her father. This is probably because to her, he's just a strange man who gives her gifts, avoids her mother, and locks himself away in his workshop. They are completely detached from each other. There seems to be very little familial connection with each other. In her room, we get an interesting scene after we interact with this merry-go-round toy thing. Judging by her last drawing of a bloodied man, and that last phrase, at this point, I don't think it's a crazy assumption to make that the painter killed his wife, and that the body parts we are using to paint the masterpiece are hers. We reach such a state of obsessive mania that he is using her, in his eyes, imperfect body to make this masterpiece. In his sick mind, he's probably fixing her, the only way he knows how. The painting of the dog on the daughter's wall is now filled with bleeding eyes, representing the daughter's permanent wound from having seen whatever it is that she saw. But that lawyer's note where he talks about him losing custody of his daughter did say he probably has a 50-50 shot of getting her back. How could a man that killed his wife even have a chance of getting his daughter back? But anyway, this time the painting material will come from the daughter, a lock of hair to use as a brush.
This was a special brush, like a horsehair brush, but different. At that point, I hesitated. Will this really work? Fuck it. I was already halfway through, and besides, it's not like I can just put it all back and forget the whole thing.
As always, the previous door now leads to the workshop. Alright, this one leads to the workshop. After using the new brush, we get a truly gory image. It's as if this man or woman is already half dead, which fits well with his perception of his wife at this point. The beautiful, talented musician did have a symbolic death to him. We exit the workshop and end up in this looping hallway. We then get to this room and find a very interesting note written by the wife. It reads, "He's on about the rats again. I don't think I've seen one, but that doesn't stop him from laying out traps all over the place. Claims he can hear them in the walls, and that there must be hundreds of them. God, I fucking hope it's true. I hope they crawl out at night and eat you in your sleep, you cruel, self-obsessed, pathetic drunk." Her resentment for the painter is quite obvious here. And I don't believe she's just exaggerating with the "I hope they crawl out at night and eat you in your sleep" comment. Her resentment for him might very well have extended to the point of even murderous intent. And I think this is well represented by the painting we find outside this very room. And also next to the proposal ring, oddly enough. The painting is Judith Slaying Holofernes by Baroque artist Artemisia Gentileschi. To briefly summarize Artemisia's story, she was raped by a man close to her. He was barely punished. In a cruel twist, Artemisia herself was tortured to verify her testimony. Her story is even more grim than that, if you want to go look into the details yourself. But the painting shows Judith and her maidservant, Abra, assassinating the Assyrian general Holofernes as he lies drunk. It's a powerful image of revenge and justice, taken directly from the Book of Judith. In the context of the game, I think this is meant to mirror the wife's feelings of rightful indignation and her desire for any form of retribution, and even her latent feelings of murderous intent. But there's not much need to theorize, as in the next note by the wife we read, "Judging by the silence that has now fallen over the house, I can safely assume that he has finally passed out, undoubtedly surrounded by empty bottles and tattered pieces of canvas that have become his preferred bedfellows. Every time it happens, I pray it will be the last. I pray fervently, passionately. Our Lord in heaven, let him crack his head open and the rot spew out. Let him cut his wrists on the glass and the red bile flow. Let him choke on his own vomit, so that we may all find peace. For if you don't, one day, I will find the courage to walk down the steps and end them myself. You of all should know, it's not the lack of will that stays my hand." In this incredibly surreal room, we find a note from the painter's agent, which reads, "Hey, sorry I haven't written in a while. I've been swarmed with work. I gotta tell you, your last letter was troubling, to say the least. I just can't believe she would set fire to your old paintings. Why would she do that? The lady in black especially. That was your tribute to her, wasn't it? I don't know what to tell you, except to get her some professional help, pronto. You could probably talk to someone as well. With all that's happened, I'm sure it would do you some good. I probably don't need to tell you that the buyer was sorely disappointed with the news. The new pieces just aren't selling as well as the classics. Anyway, I'll keep looking. You just hang in there and focus on your work. I know you still have it in you. I believe in you. Make sure to remember this tribute painting to the musician, the lady in black. In the same room, inside this chest, we find this dog muzzle.
Fucking mutt won't shut up! Hey! I can do that too! See? But can you paint? No? Well, that's alright. Neither can I, apparently.
We can see the effects of the musician's deliberate psychological attacks on the painter, successfully wearing down his confidence in his art. And there's actually a note that I had completely missed earlier in the game that I think perfectly shows this symbiotic, toxic relationship. How can two people who once loved each other so fully, so profoundly, drift so far apart? My husband barely speaks to me anymore. He just slithers in and out of his study, obsessively working on one failed painting after another. He won't even sleep with me anymore. I can tell he's disgusted by me. The look he gave me the other day, that pathetic, hurtful look, a combination of shame, guilt, and repulsion. I have come to realize that I've become a monster in my husband's eyes. It feels like nothing a woman should ever experience. Still, being the good wife that I am, I decided to realize my husband's fantasy. If he thinks me a monster, I will sure as hell act the part. We then find another one of those voice memos.
You know, even though you are my rival and the source of all my sorrows, you're also the only one I can still talk to. The only one who will listen. I'm not sure if it's funny or merely pathetic. Probably both.
Again, this beauty product also connects to the wife's brush and perfume, but we still don't really have any idea who she might be talking to. At first it seemed like perhaps it was a secret lover of the painter, but now it's become more confusing. Now in the painter's study, with this gigantic hairy baby painting, okay, This is actually a real portrait of Antonieta Gonzalez by the Renaissance artist Lavinia Fontana. Antonieta was a girl born with hypertrichosis, which causes an abnormal amount of hair to grow all over the body and especially the face. She inherited this condition from her father, Petrus Gonsalves. She was also part of the court of King Henry II of France. Why did kings and queens love to have people with various medical conditions around them? I don't know. Is it interesting? Yes. Am I going to stop answering my own questions? No. People that like this portrait believe it shows this young girl with this condition in a positive light because it doesn't have that tone of, let's go look at the malformed person now. It just shows her in quite regal clothing, holding up a piece of paper which says her life story. In this case, the game actually gives the painting a totally unique backstory. Here, it was made by our protagonist. From this newspaper clipping, we can see that it goes by the name Babyface, and it was made during the painter's creative rut after the musician's accident. This piece was not well received, as we can see by this scathing review. It looks like a result of a week-long art marathon of a not very well-adjusted painter locked in a dark basement. If we combine the real backstory of this piece with the painter's story, we can extrapolate some meaning from this. Here's my theory. The painting is of a girl who inherited a condition from her father, who is actually one of the most famous cases of said condition. Could this be the painter feeling as if he passed down this mental state he finds himself in to his daughter? His subconscious eating away at him for passing down his deep character flaws. Because while he might not be totally aware of his subconscious, how many of us are really, he is certainly aware that it is not pleasant to be him. And this is why I believe he always showers his daughter with gifts, but isn't present in her life. At the start of the game, we did find that report card which shows she's skilled in the arts but terrible in everything else. This could be the first signs of the father's personality manifesting in her. When we look back from the newspaper clipping, we open this bookcase and answer the phone.
Talk to me! Why won't you talk to me?
We then input the number we saw on the painting. These are the moments when the game is at its best, when it dedicates itself to these surreal visuals and this nonsensical reality. We then answered the phone again.
You promise!
I think this whole sequence with the phones is meant to represent the distance between the painter and the wife, both the physical distance caused by the painter purposely avoiding her, and this emotional distance they've had since the accident.
This solves nothing. It never has. It never will.
We go to answer the phone again, but we're back in the regular study, and the phone is now on the desk.
You deserve this. All of it. All of it. All of it.
This is probably something that the wife actually said to him, and you can tell it's been haunting him ever since. If you remember the beginning monologue, this is something that the painter has already integrated into himself and fully believes.
Lost. Alone. Hopeless. You probably deserve it.
We then get another piece of the wife's body.
I needed something to add the, how should I put it, final touches. A finger. I needed a finger. Chopped it off, easier than sawing a leg, washed it, dried it in an oven, fell asleep, almost burned it. Will I manage to pull this off?
We add it to the masterpiece. we start to get something that more closely resembles the musician, although still incredibly imperfect, and it seems as if half her face is still burned. After walking a bit, we get to this room. This is an original painting made for this game, but it's quite obviously inspired by Leonardo da Vinci's Lady with an Ermine. Except instead of Cecilia Gallerani, we have a hideous pale rat lady. Instead of an adorable little stoat, we have a sickly, angry rat. As to the meaning of this painting, I think it might represent the painter's subconscious view of his wife, as the catalyst to all imperfection and disgust in his life, as it is currently. And that sounds quite aggressive, but there was definitely a level of aggressive resentment to their relationship. The painter is the most blatant and obvious, and you might say the most unfair one. But the wife's resentment is also quite obvious. It's just that hers seems a little bit more warranted. And we'll get to see one of the ways she manifests that resentment in a little bit. On the ground, we find a dead rat.
You mind explaining this to me? I know what it is. Care to tell me how it got in my workshop? Stop lying! We both know it couldn't have gotten there on its own.
So, the wife, undoubtedly aware of the painter's neuroticism, plants a dead rat in his studio. Pretty funny, I think. After pulling up the painter's works, as if fishing them out from his own subconscious, we find a flaming bed with some bandages.
Is that her? Oh, God. Can she hear us? This is all fixable, right? No, you don't understand. Her face, her hands. She will be devastated.
As if it couldn't get more obvious, we see that his true worry at the moment of the accident was the loss of his muse. For him, this was the death of the beautiful, talented musician which inspired his works. And from this next note, written by her, we see that she had probably started to grasp his true nature even before the accident. It reads, "I think I should be happy. Why am I not happy? I have a beautiful daughter. I think she is. I know she is. So why can't I look at her without feeling sick? I used to have a loving husband. Wonderful. Sensitive. Now all I see is this strange man who only cares about his paintings. Like they matter at all. It's all so pointless. Music used to help. Doesn't anymore." I think the wife couldn't bear to look at her daughter without feeling sick because, on a subconscious level, she realized the painter's true nature. She had a child with a man who never truly saw her as his partner, but rather as another one of his masterpieces, a creation meant to be admired. At the time it might have seemed innocent, but his marriage proposal hints at this in quite an insidious way.
The thought alone that the most beautiful piece of art doesn't have my name on it is killing me. So, will you marry me?
This is an almost literal objectification. It caused immense pressure on her, to the point that the music she loved, her art, held no joy for her anymore. It had been tainted by the painter's neurotic obsession with perfection. Next we find a little memento where his wife is talking to that mysterious figure again.
God, I am such an idiot. To think that someone like me could ever compete with you in all your sublime beauty, everlasting, immortal.
But in this next room, we finally find out who she's been talking to all this time.
I finally figured it out. And it's all thanks to you. You've showed me that there's no other way. Even now, your sad smile confirms what should have been obvious. We will not speak again.
the mysterious figure who steals the painter's attention away from her, who seems to bring her down at every turn, the only person she could truly talk to. Eternally youthful, an immortal beauty forever captured in his oil paints, a beauty that, with each passing day, she fails more and more to live up to. The painter's tribute to her, the Lady in Black. Remember that Oscar Wilde quote from the beginning of the game? Every portrait that is painted with feeling is a portrait of the artist, not of the sitter. The musician, after the accident, is still having to live with the painter's previously perfect perception of her. This painting is as much a portrait of the musician as it is a representation of all that she is not. And in the next room, we'll find out why she says they will not speak again.
What is taking so long? Open this fucking door! I need to go! Open up! Hell is... Oh, God. No. No. What have you done? No!
She decided to cut her wrists in the bathtub. I'm willing to bet a lot of you thought the painter would be the one to take her life. But I guess to him, there's not much of a difference. Above their bed was a haunting painting by Francisco Goya, known simply as a bandit murdering a woman, part of his Scenes of Banditry series. In the game, I think this piece could symbolize the painter's aggressive resentment towards his wife after the accident, blaming her for no longer living up to the image of perfection he had in his mind. But now, knowing your fate, that interpretation feels hollow. Instead, the painting seems more like a reflection of the guilt he harbored. Guilt over pushing her to the point where she felt no other escape. This image of this man taking the life of this woman may very well represent his own hand in her death. Not through some sort of direct violence, but through this emotional torment and neglect. He then shoves his head in the water, and we get these hazy scenes. I wonder if this sequence is meant to represent the painter attempting suicide after discovering the wife's body. We then wake up in a mirrored bathroom, leaving that paint or tar or ash-filled reality. A moment of clarity for the painter, perhaps. We then get the last body part to complete the masterpiece, her eye. After all, if anyone deserves to judge and criticize the masterpiece, it would be her.
Someone had to bear witness. I couldn't just look at my own work. Art and the artist needed an audience, a critical eye on things. I knew what I had to do. I gouged it, scooped it up like ice cream, felt like a butcher, a monster, but at least there was to come something beautiful from all this filth.
Then followed by what I can only assume a complete psychotic break. We get the most nonsensical environment in the game, where it seems all fragments of the painter's mind mesh together chaotically. I genuinely don't even know how to analyze this besides it being a complete mental breakdown. When we finally get to the workshop, we take a look at that note that throughout the game has been constantly changing. I believe this is the wife's suicide note. It reads, "I used to hate you. Not anymore. I think even now, in spite of everything, I might still love you. You see, I finally understand. I know how you must feel. Lost, alone. It took me a while, but I finally realized. Even with us, you have always been alone. I recognize that now as the quintessential part of your being. And I admit, hoping we could become a true part of your life was a grave error on my part, a grotesque misunderstanding. Still, if we are to make any sense of this, if any of this ever mattered to you, finish it, for us." This note shows that, despite everything, she was still compassionate and understanding, seeing beyond the cruelty he subjected her to. She acknowledges his isolation, his loneliness, his perfectionism, as part of his very nature. And despite her extreme pain, surprisingly, she never stopped loving him. Even in her final words, she extends an olive branch, urging him to finish the masterpiece. Not for himself, but for them. He owes them that at least. And it's this note that brings him to his final realization.
Yes, that's it, my love. I am so sorry. No, it's a lie. It's always been a lie. It won't bring them back. I see it now. I know what must be done.
No matter how perfect the masterpiece is, it can never undo the past or bring back the family he destroyed. The painting, in all its perfection, is hollow. We come to a room filled with failed attempts at making the masterpiece. This is what he did while avoiding his family. The guilt is just too much for him to bear.
Why so serious?